very good. The president just out with comments on Libya, Yemen, and Bahrain. He says that he urges them to show restraint. There's no restraint in Washington over the budget. Dan Clifton, Strategas Research Partners, will bring clarity. Dan, good noon to you.
Good noon to you.
What is the single point we need to know about this budget debate? I'm bored by it. Tell me the one thing I need to know this weekend.
Well, the question is going to be whether we're going to reduce spending as a percent of gross domestic product. If we're going to keep it at 25% of GDP, the debt to GDP ratio is going to blow out, and there's going to be larger concerns about the U.S. government being able to meet its commitments in the future, even as a reserve currency itself. I would say that this is the game of chicken. In 2 or 3 weeks, we're going to learn, Tom, what the actual budget is going to look like. Remember, Tom, we have 3 different budget issues moving at once. The continuing resolution for this fiscal year, the debt limit increase, and fiscal year 2012. We have to fight the continuing resolution first, and I think that's where the priority is going to be this week.
Let's bring up the chart that tells 1,000 words. Thanks to Dan Clifton for featuring this in his note today from Strategas. No, folks, don't email me. I don't send out the notes. We protect the copyright of our strategists and economists. Spending to GDP, and you can see here, up it goes to the 70s. This is a long chart, back to the 50s. And there's that breath of fresh air in the late 80s, 90s. Then down we go, low spending to GDP. We surge for whatever reason. Dan Clifton, when are we going to return to that 21% line?
Well, I think that's what the Bowles-Simpson Commission was trying to do. We're having a debate right now about whether discretionary spending really matters in the budget. In a sense, Tom, it does. We're talking about $60 billion on a $3.5 trillion base, but you start ratcheting down the baseline, not just this year, but out the next 10 years. When we had the financial crisis, we did a stimulus, and that increased spending considerably. What we're trying to do now is move back down to those pre-2009 levels. And I think that's what the real budget debate is about. Are we going to keep it at these levels or go back?
Do the jawboning of the Republicans, including me talking with Mick Mulvaney on Bloomberg Surveillance the other day, does that push against any of this, or is that just small numbers? It's more political posturing.
Well, there's a lot of posturing. The Speaker of the House yesterday said that he's willing to shut down the government if the continuing resolution is not doing it.
Are they going to do that? Do I need to worry about that over the weekend?
Well, I think it's posturing. I'm not worried about it over the weekend. We're going to do a short-term temporary continuing resolution to avoid a government shutdown. But you're starting to see the real stakes here, is that the Republicans can't vote for a bill that's not going to reduce spending. That's what they campaigned on. The Democrats are not going to try and do a bill that's cuts spending too much. And so the middle ground is, where's the deal? Are we going to do a deal on entitlement reforms that is coupled with these shorter-term issues? And I think that's kind of where the debate is headed right now.
Dan, I had about as much gray hair as you have when we first had this discussion. You got to be kidding me. What you just said, we could have had that conversation 2 years ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago. I went to a dinner with the Concord Coalition before you were born. When's this debate going to change? When are we going to actually do something?
Well, Tom, let's look at where we're headed as a country, right? Is that we're in a sense that you need some sort of catalyst to pull that forward. And that catalyst is going to be, where are rates going? You need some sort of market event. What if we don't raise the debt limit? We have a technical default. Rates go through the roof. And let me tell you this, Tom, is that interest costs are about to explode. We have been funding the government at 0% interest rates. As rates go higher, the interest cost balloons. That starts crowding out domestic programs that everybody wants. At the same time, you got healthcare starting to squeeze the budget. So you're seeing market events with rates. You're also seeing political events with the budget getting squeezed out. That might be the way to bring everybody together and get this done. We've been talking, Tom, about green shoots for entitlement reform. You have 5 senators that are retiring in 2012. You're starting to see it building underneath the radar screen. We're just not there yet to get it.
Dan, I want to bring up a Paul Krugman op-ed piece, if we could. Paul, all fired up about the deficit and the harm that those cuts will do. Willie Sutton Webb. People in Washington often talk as if there were a program called Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, supercalifragilistic, expialidocious, then focus on things like raising the retirement age. I don't know if you saw that, Dan, but I love how Paul conflated all those big programs. When are we going to deal with them?
Well, I think that we're having a problem where we can't distinguish between the short term and the long term, but I think both of them need to be addressed. Hey, Tom, if we just froze discretionary spending, or even if we cut discretionary spending, the budget is still going to rise in line with nominal GDP and stay at those very elevated levels, largely because the automatic programs, the Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid, will continue to increase at very high rates. So you need to address both of them. But if you address the retirement age, that's not really getting the short-term entitlement cost under control. It's just changing the future trajectory. But I work with institutional investors every day, both on the equity and the fixed income side, and changing that trajectory is what the key is. I think we're starting to see this at the state level with the pension reforms that are going to be happening in 2011 and 2012. Right. You're changing the unfunded liability trajectory, and I think that's what we need to do at the federal level as well.
And by that was a shameless plug, Rex. Get that up here. Dan Clifton identifying his clients. We can't let him get away with that. Here we are, Dan Clifton. The young guns take on the Senate. There's outlays higher. We showed this chart weeks ago, folks. Revenues rolling over. I mean, Dan, again, we have a budget debate. We all understand it's a lot of political posturing. What should we be looking at to know it's going to be a real debate? What's the single thing in this February that matters?
Well, I would say this, that I would break it into three categories. From a political indicator, we know where the voters are right now. They're choosing on a generic ballot, who do you want to run Congress? We're watching for changes on that. If you start seeing it tip the other way to the Democrats, that's clear that Obama has the upper hand in this. The second point is I would watch where rates go. Rates are moving at the same time that equities are going up. If you see them actually accelerate past where equities are going, that's going to be a signal of trouble there. And then finally, Tom, I would watch how revenues are starting to explode. In California, we saw that revenues went up 20% in the fourth quarter. We're seeing at the federal level as well. But there's only limits as how much you can get from tax revenues, which then starts putting the pressure on the spending.
How do you push against Brad DeLong or James K. Galbraith of Texas, DeLong of Berkeley, where they say, look, rates are low, rates are contained, it's the United States, we can handle a big budget? How do you respond to the comments of, say, Professor Galbraith?
Well, look, Tom, under the normal income tax system, we have only hit 20% of GDP in tax revenues 3 times, and they bounce right back. It's almost like a technical indicator. The average is 18.5%. If we want to continue to spend at that level, we would have to create a value-added tax. We'd have to bring in a new tax system to be able to spend at that level, or your debt-to-GDP ratio just blows out completely, and that would be a sign of trouble.
Dan, one question. Does anybody in Washington actually read the budget?
Look, I think that there's some staff that read the budget, but I think you bring up a very good point. At some point, we have to know what we're spending on, where we're raising this revenue from, because hard decisions are going to have to be made. We've been telling our clients austerity is here. This is just the beginning of that process.
Dan Clifton, thank you so much. Strategas Research Partners.